Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Abby, and I help run events here at the Strand. Before we launch into a discussion of Rosecrans Baldwin's new book, Everything Now, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until after 93 years, the Strand is the sole survivor, now run by third-generation owner Nancy Bass Whiten. We want to thank all of you for your support. With our loyal community of book lovers and authors such as Rosecrans and Corey, we wouldn't be here today. We also want to thank our presenting partners for tonight's event, the New Republic. The New Republic was founded in 1914 as a call to arms for public-minded citizens advocating liberal reform in a rapidly changing world. Now, 2 decades into a new century, the New Republic remains, if anything, more committed than ever to quality, independent journalism featuring news, analysis, and commentary on politics, climate change, inequality, books, and art. The New Republic content can be found in print, online, and on their dedicated podcasts and events. For more information, please visit newrepublic.com. Tonight, we're thrilled to have with us Rosecrans Baldwin for the launch of his newest book, Everything Now, Lessons from the City-State of Los Angeles. Rosecrans Baldwin is the author of The Last Kid Left, You Lost Me There, and Paris, I Love You, But You're Bringing Me Down. He is a frequent contributor to GQ and co-founded the online zine, The Morning Muse. He lives in Los Angeles. Joining Rosecrans in conversation tonight is Choire Sicha. Choire is an editor at the New York Times and is the author of Very Recent History. So without further ado, please welcome Rosecrans and Choire to the stage.
All right. To the stage, sir.
To the stage. It feels so good.
Hey, welcome to your reading, Rosecrans.
Thanks, Corey. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks to Strand and the New Republic.
Thank you to the Strand and the New Republic. And actually, special thanks to Corey for hosting this. This is Corey is an old friend, and I'm very happy to see his face.
I love to host. That sounds like an entendre of some sort. So that aside, I'm insisting that we start with Rosecrans reading a little bit from his book, Everything Now, which is a title I'm sort of stuck on. I need you to discuss later with me. But if you give us a little spice, because it's brand new and people may not have read it, so they should know what's inside and what it sounds like, and a little bit of this. So I think you should read.
Okay, I will read a very short portion. It's 4 pages. I swear it will take I'll go fast too. Anyway, this is a nonfiction book. Very broadly speaking, it's a little bit about what it's like to live and work in Los Angeles these days. That almost entirely comes from me spending a couple years just interviewing dozens of people to find out what it is like for them, and plus a lot of research and just reading of tons and tons of Los Angeles authors. So frequently in the book, there are these sort of brief scenes where I am just going out and shadowing somebody or just hanging out. I'm a fly on the wall. So this is one of those scenes. And also, thank you to everybody for being here. History in Los Angeles is not chronological, Dan Johnson said flatly, approximately 1 minute into our first conversation. Originally from Virginia, a son of the U.S. Navy, for most of the last decade, Johnson had lived in Skid Rowkio, the quarter between Skid Row and Little Tokyo, as a man of multiple occupations, reviewing restaurants, scouting film locations, producing radio segments for the Dodgers. He'd also worked with homeless men at the Midnight Mission for several years, helping to improve their reading skills using the Skid Row Reader, a textbook he put together himself. We met one summer afternoon near the Bong Souk. It wasn't called that, but it should be, east of the historic quarter downtown where every window display was full of glass pipes. Johnson had the look of an outlaw from a spaghetti western, drooping mustache, sad eyes, and tended to speak in paragraphs lacking much in the way of stopping points. And I'm going to try and do an exact rendition. This guy Johnson has some of the biggest lungs out there. So here we go. History in Los Angeles is not chronological, he repeated, staring across the street. And to understand Los Angeles, you need to grasp that its history is simultaneous, a pastiche full of waves of innovation and backsliding, with people working through their own independent narratives in a chaotic fashion where all of us live under the shadow of all these different stories, plus a giant body of sadness that will never be accounted for, that memory will not recollect. a sadness that the historical record will not show when it comes time to account for this city of conquest, imprisonment, and ambition, where people have been quietly destroying themselves and each other since the 1700s. He took a breath. And yeah, maybe that same can be said of other American cities. But here it's cut with the idea, I can go to Los Angeles and become a star, where a man or a woman can show up and go look at the big houses in the Palisades, the big Victorians in Echo Park, and said man or woman can realistically think, I'm going to make it. But imagine you start out or arrive here thinking, I'm going to make it. And then 30 years later, you don't. Maybe instead of a mansion with a swimming pool on the roof, you wind up in low-income housing or worse. Another breath. Because that's the shit that destroys the egos of people here, perhaps more than anything else. Newcomers and natives. And frankly, it's a condition all but omnipresent that few people speak about. The disparity of what you want when you arrive in Los Angeles, the things you assume you'll get along the way, and then the reality of the situation when it doesn't work out. History in Los Angeles isn't chronological, he said again, still staring across the street. It's coinciding, ever-present, and constantly fucking people up. I should have done a warning about the language in this section. Forgive me. Around Skid Row, some blocks look more doomsday than others. The vicinity of the Midnight Mission is often where things seem worse. A woman in a bra and underwear slumped over a chair. An angry man walking around with his genitals exposed. But also to be seen were many people assisting others. Residents helped one another move belongings. People shared food in the sunlight. Nearby were shelters, clinics, employment agencies. A long line waited for two guys giving free haircuts under a pop-up tent. Later, asked if he ever got used to it, Johnson shook his head, both yes and no. I might be numb at this point, he said. I've spent so much time aggressively loving and advocating for Los Angeles and also bitterly hating it. Really, really hating it. The Midnight Mission, operating since 1914, was one of Skid Row's oldest social service organizations. Johnson's class took place in a brightly lit room full of computers. His homemade textbook included some 24 short readings that he used to start discussion. In his opinion, adult education worked best when it encouraged people to ramble meaningfully. I tell people it's a digressive text. It's a digressive class, he said. We spent 20 minutes the other day talking shit on Drake. That day, 5 men showed up, white, black, Latino, ranging in age from teenager to senior. Johnson asked everyone to turn to an excerpt from John Fonte's Ask the Dust. Honestly, it felt like a setup. The day I was visiting, he picked the Los Angeles novel. But Johnson insisted that the choice belonged to Ben, an older white guy with a thick beard and a crisp Lakers t-shirt. Published in 1939, Ask the Dust came out the same year as 2 other local classics, The Day of the Locust by Nathaniel West, and Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep. The main character in Dust, Arturo Bandini, was a wannabe writer with a stomach rotting from eating too many oranges being the source of LA's booming at the time, who wandered downtown thinking of all the ways he'd been wronged. The men in class took turns reading aloud. Johnson would interrupt to discuss tricky words or ask questions. An older gentleman, Arthur, read slowly. And I remember what Helen wore that day, a white dress, and how it made me sing at the loins when I touched it. Arthur, what are your loins? Johnson asked. Your clothes? Arthur offered. Your sneakers? Said someone else. No, your goods, man, Johnson said. The package. If you're singing in the loins, if you see a nice-looking girl, what could it mean, Arthur? Arthur laughed. He's getting turned on. The men giggled together bashfully. Arthur said under his breath, this guy's singing in the loins constantly. Later, during a discussion about brothels, one of the men likened the days of red light districts to today's Skid Row, where vice was tolerated as long as it didn't creep out into, say, Bel Air. It's like when the cops drive around and you've got folks smoking crack, selling heroin, and the cops drive by and don't do anything about it, the man said. They know where they're at, and they know what they're doing. After class, Ben, the man who picked the day's reading, told me he'd been in and out of the mission for several years. He liked Ask the Dust because Bandini was whacked out not on opioids, but visions, dreams of things that should have happened for him. So many of the guys coming in here, they've been gone so long, they're seeing stuff that's not there, he said. They'll be talking, saying stuff they're seeing. We don't see what they're seeing. There's a lot of great storytellers on the smoking deck, you better believe. Ben picked up the textbook and tapped the pages. Bandini is making stuff up to keep himself going. That's why this is my favorite story. I can identify with it. He knows he's losing it. He's going downhill, but he's trying to stay alive. That could be me. Thank you. I'm just going to put this right here, Corey, if that's all right.
Oh, a little spawn.
Right here.
A little sponsored moment for yourself. That's great. Thank you for reading. And your reading brought me to one of my prepared questions. And by the way, people in this room should know there's an ask a question button below there, probably. And you should leave some questions there for later. We'll answer yours unless they're offensive in some terrible way. I don't know what they could be. As soon as I run out of questions, which won't be long. But so Rosecrans, and like a number of points in this book, including the part you just read, including the book's title, you make some pretty intense assertions about the nature of time and space. And I wonder if you'd care to elaborate on your thesis that time is not linear.
Okay. Also, the crowd should know that you did not supply me with these questions ahead of time, so I'm not sure where we're going.
This is fucking journalism, people.
This is New York City bookstore. We're not messing around. Time and space can sometimes feel differently in Los Angeles, in my opinion, based on my experience in living in New York, in Paris, in Cape Town for a little while when I was a student. There is a sense here, again, my opinion, but also what a lot of people told me in these interviews, that Los Angeles can get knocked, I think, a little bit naively for not having a history, which would just suggest that you don't know the history of Los Angeles. But there is a sense that given how frequently our days climate-wise seem to resemble each other, especially if you don't live here. You know, there's the people who don't live here will say that Los Angeles doesn't have seasons. We just have different seasons. But I can see how, looking from the outside, Los Angeles can feel sort of like an ever-present moment. Now, it's one that is prone to a lot of disruption, whether it has to do with social issues, earthquakes, fires. But there is the idea that people here are doing a bit of a Groundhog Day. And I don't think that's entirely offbeat in terms of the aesthetic experience or the emotional experience of Los Angeles, even for residents, even for people who are born here. There are people who never leave their neighborhood, you know, which in this vast place, there's a lot of neighborhoods to live in. So the idea that time and space behave differently here obviously is about sort of the subjective experience. But man, when you're driving around and you're going from one neighborhood to another, which you would think, for the sake of being contiguous, for sitting next to one another, that they might have more things in common or common feeling, and yet can contain vastly different communities. And those communities themselves really just splintered down into a ton of different people. And then when you are sort of staring at the light at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it just feels like this white blue dome is over the city, and there's the sense that time isn't moving at all. But you have felt that way for 25 years, and now you've sensed sort of this vast amount of time that has rushed by. I mean, I'm hearing that from people who have been here for a long time. I've only lived in Los Angeles for about 6 years. So again, so much of this book is about me just trying to listen to people from all walks of life from different parts of LA to get a sense of it. But yeah, I'm willing to assert that time and space, that we are in a loophole, a wormhole of physics in LA County.
I think I think a lot of the literature agrees with you. It's interesting. One of the things about growing up in Los Angeles, and you talk about this a lot in various ways in the book, is that, like, and I'm saying, like, I am a Valley girl. I'm proud to admit I've lived all over Los Angeles. In fact, and I relate to the time and space thing too, because I actually spent a lot of time trying to figure out where the places I lived are. Like, I spent a lot of time on Google Maps being like, where was that one house we lived that year? Anyway, but the other thing that underlies all that California stuff is death and disaster. And you talk a lot about becoming acclimated to it. Yeah. Like, California is one of those places where you go and visit. Like, when I go back and visit, people are like, well, we had to kill all the livestock last year because there was no water, but everything's fine now. You're like, what the fuck? And so like, certainly like people become acclimated to this stuff, and what I think you're seeing a lot, and what you're saying in this book a lot, is that like we are unprepared to face the things that are like stabbing us in the face repeatedly, and whether that's homelessness, and whether that's inequality, whether it's climate disaster and becoming climate refugees. We're not doing anything about that, and that's like an essential condition of Californianness. But do you think, did COVID change a little bit of that? Did the last year, did seeing that we can change a little bit, do you think that altered the course, or do you think we're just going to see it through until the mudslide hits us or whatever?
Right. I think the mudslide this idea, quote unquote, the mudslide hits us, I actually think is very good, because I think if you take homelessness, it's very easy to ignore homelessness until homelessness is on your front doorstep, or homelessness is happening to your sister, or homelessness is happening to you. Los Angeles can claim with credit to have voted for an enormous bond to, fund big sort of solutions, supposedly, to try and solve the homelessness crisis that is here in the, bigger than anywhere else, and progress is not being made nearly at the scale that it needs to happen. As to whether or not, you drive around Los Angeles and problems are in your face, whether it is homelessness, whether it is climate crisis, the fire season is real, and I have friends of mine waking up from fire nightmares, and it's already starting. It is at the same time a lusciously beautiful place. And I don't just mean sort of like the fancy neighborhoods. I mean, lots of, even parts of industrial Los Angeles just have a certain shimmer to them that I find really exciting. There was an urban planner, James Rojas, who I talked to a lot about, and he was explaining that, Los Angeles doesn't have coziness. We don't do coziness the way that there is an aesthetic filigree to architecture in New York City and San Francisco or Boston, or perhaps sort of the gloss on certain structures in Miami. But Los Angeles has grit. Los Angeles has concrete and barbed wire and sand. And in spite of that, or perhaps to go along with it, you still see, particularly emphasize, underline, in Latinx neighborhoods, the social cohesion of people enjoying themselves and their families and their friends out on the street, on the front porch, in the front yard. The display that I saw of someone, a veteran who had put up their medals from, I think, Vietnam or Korea, like in a little box next to the mailbox, that there's just some social cohesion that he was attaching to, for example, Parisian cafe culture, and that you would see that in Boyle Heights. It just looked a little bit different. So as to whether or not COVID did much to improve things or change things, there's a woman, remarkable, very inspiring, and just a really terrific thinker named Suzette Shaw, the book is divided into 7 chapters. And most of the chapters begin with sort of a profile of someone that I met who really stood out to represent certain aspects of what it's like to be an Angelino or to live in Los Angeles. And this woman, Suzette, grew up in Arizona, lived in Silicon Valley for a while, working for different startups and stuff, and then found her way through some unfortunate events to Skid Row, and now is sort of this extraordinary example of someone who, through determination and creativity and empathy for other people, has sort of become almost a spokesperson for the neighborhood. But she was telling me, I spoke to her on the phone through lockdown because I got to know her before it. I promise this, I'm going to wind up this answer in a second. But Suzette was talking about how she was just seeing more people in Skid Row, particularly more white families, that she attributed perhaps to the pandemic. She didn't want to say what she couldn't explain necessarily for fact, but it just seemed to be like, the economic disparities of Los Angeles, I think, became even more torn, more pulled apart, because here we have so many billionaires, but also many, many more people who are really, really struggling. And that gap is just ever widening here in a way that I think is true across the country. But in LA, things are stark.
So my takeaway is people don't care.
Um,
That's not right, but something like that. I just think like
Dude, there are so many people there, Carrie. Let's be
true.
sincere for a second. LA is full of social workers and people doing outreach and volunteers and arts organizations. Whatever. I'm just gonna stump for them for a second. There are lots of people doing good work, and
Sure.
Choire Sicha doesn't think so. But
no, I should. But I also think that maybe you would advocate for armed overthrow, perhaps also.
I don't know that I'll go on the record with that, but we can talk later.
I have some things I flagged in the book I'm going to have you address in a minute, but I will say that most LA stories, and I really appreciate that your book did not start off with like in 2007 when I discovered Los Angeles. And by the way, I wanted to tell you that something I talk about all the time is I went to a state park in California a few years back, and it had like a history like diagram, like it had like a real you know what I mean, like wow, like you have an elementary
diorama,
little diorama basically, and it said something like in the 1850s the Native Americans abandoned this land.
Oh, abandoned
to this area just for fishing, for new arrivals to fish it. It was like the craziest thing, and I thought about that a lot while I was reading your book, because I was like, there's a lot of history of LA that's literally like, well, it was just here and everything seems fine. It was ready for us, which is completely, as you point out really nicely, not the case.
Right.
But I was going to say that about you, that most LA stories start with the author's discovery of Los Angeles, and you didn't do that. But why did you go to Los Angeles, and why did you stay there? So far.
Right. Yes. And while I think on that, I will point out, because I like to get this out in the open, that I don't really have any innate credibility to write about Los Angeles. And I also, having read pretty much, every book I could get my hands on about Los Angeles, fiction, nonfiction, poetry, there's so many of those books that are about people sort of touching down from the East Coast and formulating, hey, I'm at the Chateau Marmont and I've got an opinion, and now here's 7,000 words on it. It's just gross and it's tacky. So I wasn't going to go there. But we came to Los Angeles, Rachel and I came to Los Angeles because we were living in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. We're both writers. We had an idea for a TV show. It thankfully, luckily, got some traction out here, and suddenly we sort of had a deal, and we'd never written anything together. And then, like all things in Hollywood, the deal fell apart just at the finish line. But Rachel and I, who we'd always been each other's editors and first readers, we realized we really enjoyed writing together. And there's a tradition in Hollywood of husband and wife writing teams. And so I think we were just looking for something different, and we were ready to leave North Carolina. And so moved to Los Angeles. Why do I stay here? Very early on, probably like within literally 2 weeks, I felt like I was home here. And I can't, and this isn't in the book, but because the book's not a memoir, and I didn't want it to be, I'm in it at times, but I couldn't account for it. I couldn't explain it. But something I was testing out in a theory 2 nights ago at a house party. I'm going to house parties now. I'm vaccinated. It's amazing. People, hugging people. I was at a house party in Venice, and I was talking to someone, and they were sort of saying something along these lines, and I was too, that New York, since especially this is a Strand reading, New York is a wonderful place to go, especially if you want, generally, New York is a wonderful place to go. It's also a wonderful place to go if you want to be an insider. Like if you really want to be an insider in finance or publishing or advertising or fashion or any of the various industries that are headquartered in New York, that's where you need to go. But if there's something about LA that if you have suspected or you've felt for a long time that you're a bit of an outsider or that you don't quite fit, and I don't mean that in like a really sort of like egotistical, like, a way that's just sort of like it's an affectation. But if there's a genuine feeling deep down that you are still looking for the place where you might slot in, LA has room for that. LA is so big. LA is just the combination of the vast terrain, but then also the density of and diversity at the same time makes for a place that I just find really, really exciting for all of its problems.
You do tend to run into exciting situations and people constantly in Los Angeles. It's one of its charms. Do you know what I mean? Like you can't help it.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
You're cheek to jowl, and then. But I have a couple of things you flagged about I flagged that I want to talk about. You write about this very briefly, but you wrote, for more than a year, I posted an ad online each month to see if anyone nearby wanted to talk about loneliness. What did you have correspondence? Did you have loneliness meetups? Like, what happened here?
This was I was trying to do as much reporting as possible, but I got one person agreed to talk to me for every 5 people that I tried to talk to, right? And sometimes I'm going around and just talking to the waitress in the diner, but that's like it's so hack. It's like an opinion column where it's like, my taxi cab driver told me this about the situation in Beirut, so here's 1,000 words. What I wanted to do though was try to really just keep getting voices, getting information. And so I went on Craigslist. I mean, where else do you go? And so I would post every month on Craigslist for about a year and a half, being like, hi, I'm a writer. I'm working on a book about Los Angeles. Some people describe Los Angeles as a lonely place. If you're feeling lonely, I'd love to talk to you about it. Something like that. It was even more lame boilerplate, but I got a lot of responses. I think I talked about this in the book. I got a lot of responses that people thought I was soliciting for sex. So I would get interesting invitations. I also got an invitation to a wrestling match in Long Beach, which I wasn't able to go to, but I regret that.
Was that also a sex invitation? There's a great Jonathan.
I don't know, but it was a backyard punk rock amateur wrestling group where they were staging amateur wrestling in someone's backyard, and there'd be a band.
I know. Great.
Right.
I would like to go to that right now.
I will find the email and talk to you later. In any case, but then I would have these long email correspondences with people that were just talking about what it's like to be in LA. And sometimes there were people who had just moved here. Sometimes there were people who had one guy had lived in South Central, born and raised, lived there all his life. He was in his late 20s, and we just went back and forth and back and forth. So yeah. And then one guy told me about all the times he had robbed people, and he was trying to get me to send him nudes. And I kept being like, listen, please understand, I don't want to hear about this. If you want to talk about loneliness, great. But otherwise, no nudes. In the end, no nudes. No nudes.
You're not writing a book about junk. The other thing I'm sort of obsessed with, because I have entered and exited or near entered and near exited many. I mean, cults is a big word, but let's call them projects. Throughout my time, and you wrote, you said, if self-help was a habit in the United States, it seemed pathological in Los Angeles. And I think people have written a lot about this in the past, so it's maybe not a new point, but do you see the California's like personal quest for meaning? It seems like it's a dominant contribution to American and maybe world thought now, but is that still raging in Los Angeles? It seems like it.
Yes, I think there are many people and organizations in Los Angeles that would love to help you, and they would love to try. They would love to try, and they would love to accept money to try. I mean, you can walk down my street and find papered advertisements stapled to the phone pole that advertise life coaches. And I live down the street from a psychic, and there's a psychic 3 blocks, from there. And that's not rare in Los Angeles. Why do I think there's more of it here perhaps than other places? I think, first of all, there is a general tolerance around Los Angeles for sort of certain things. It's not uncommon to get in a conversation and just feel like it's just a very open-ended conversation, and you're not sure quite where it's going to go. And in terms of the self-improvement, there's a long tradition of it here. There's obviously sort of the whole woo-woo of it all. And you mentioned cults. There's certainly groups that would take advantage of you. These days, some may seem more like multi-level marketing schemes that just have a twinge of psychotherapy 101, and some, I'm sure, because I have to be very careful how I talk about this to not tread into dangerous waters legally, some that might be, a little bit looking to take advantage, and that can lead to severe distress and trauma for certain people. And there's some of that in the book of people that I got to know and who had experienced some really, really horrible things. But I do want to say one thing, because you brought this up. A lot's been written about it. There are cliches about LA. There's about 6 billion of them, and some of them remain true. And it's sort of like I couldn't write a book about Los Angeles that didn't address some of them. It's difficult with this kind of book where I'm trying to go very deep and very shallow at the same time, and very wide and very narrow at the same time. I'm at some point going to write about Hollywood. I'm at some point going to write about natural disasters. But hopefully I found enough other sort of new aspects of Los Angeles to sort of balance it all out.
I mean, listen, if you're not being invited to a nude something at some point, you're not living in Los Angeles. Yes.
Hopefully it's a wrestling punk show.
That sounds nice. It really does, I'm not lying. I'd like to pivot a little bit and ask you about your longtime web publication, The Morning News, which I feel like gets undercredited in the history of the internet a little bit. Not because it's not great or not because it's not acknowledged. It's just that people are stupid. And I mean, The Morning News predates Gawker by like 3 or so years. It's still thriving. It has an annual tournament of books. How is it? How is The Morning News doing?
The Morning News is doing well. It's in an interesting phase. So yeah, I co-founded The Morning News with Andrew Womack. We for a while were just sort of an online literary magazine publishing the likes of Choire Sicha and Sarah Hepla and Paul Ford and Alexander Chi and all kinds of really wonderful people with beautiful writing. And it was great, those early web days. I remember seeing you at parties where it's like you and Leslie Harpold and Jason Kotke and Nick. Anyway, that was an interesting world. These days, it's going great. We're sort of like a newsletter, website, link blog. Kind of remember Robot Wisdom, if we want to go really deep cut. But we also have, the Tournament of Books, which is this annual event in March where we get people from the publishing world at different levels to sort of read 2 books at the same time and talk about why they might like one more than the other and what that says about their taste in books. And then they advance one to move on in sort of this pseudo March Madness bracket. But we're in the middle of our summer extension of that. It's like a pop-up. We're doing, it's called Camp TOB. And I'm actually leading the discussions this month. So anyone who wants to check it out, come to themorningnews.org. Thank you, Choire Sicha, for the plug.
Love to plug. I'm going to start folding in questions from our captive audience here. Who are choosing to spend either their late afternoon or early evening with us. I'm a time zone agnostic bro myself. Here's a great one from Tiff Stevens. Any theory why Brits seem so charmed and taken by LA? Thinking of Jeff Dyer, David Hockney. This is a great point, and I had not thought to ask this question, and I love it.
That's a great question. And let me see if I can talk about Jeff without getting myself in trouble or getting him in trouble. I occasionally play tennis with Jeff. Last I heard, his elbow is tweaked, so it's not happening. I think actually, I'm not going to put any words in Jeff's mouth. I'm just going to say what my opinion is. My opinion is that LA is quite different from London, in my experience. And yet there is a sprawlingness. Like when I think about, let's just talk about cities for a second. Mm-hmm. When I think about the sprawl of LA, the sort of amoeba of it all, the cities that are companions in my mind are Tokyo, London, Berlin, Johannesburg a little bit. And London has that sense of, it's the stone of London isn't going anywhere. And Los Angeles doesn't have that. Los Angeles, there's a wonderful writer here named Linnell George who writes quite a bit about, or had a whole book called After Image, about how driving around Los Angeles, you'll just see buildings gone, businesses destroyed. And it's not the same as going to New York and the Radio Shack has become a Subway, has become an Apple store. There's literally like just boom, gone, flattened, and then something new. And that can happen here overnight. Now, as to why people like Christopher Isherwood, I'm trying to think I'm sorry, I'm going to blank right now, so I'm not going to come up with a good list of other names. But I think Los Angeles does allow you to be here. There's a lot of room. If you felt cramped somewhere else, there's likely room for you in Los Angeles. And I think whether you are British or you're Ethiopian or you're Chinese, I wouldn't be surprised. I can't speak for any of these people, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was a factor.
There's also an industry reason, which is that they are cut rate in Hollywood. So you just hire English actors and they're like a third of the price. Which is why we have so many fine, wonderful English actors out there too. But it's true. I think of Hockney a lot, and I just think of like why they wanted to be in this place that was the opposite of, well, not the opposite, but the opposite, maybe the climately.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not gray and rainy all the time. It is gray, solidly, mostly from May through June, but
cozy times.
Cozy times.
Here's one from Lauren, no last name.
Hi, Lauren, no last name.
I'm going to pretend a number of wonderful Laurens. There is an idealized glamour component to LA, yet like so many other large cities, there's a major economic disparity amongst the wealthy and the working class. Where do you see this trend shifting? Will LA still hold significance if only the wealthy can afford it? Which is a central part of your book, and so therefore an exceptionally great question, Lauren.
Great question, Lauren. Thank you. Where do I see this going? I think it's going to get worse. It's getting worse all the time. It is getting worse right now. There's an interview. Oh, man. Let's see if I can pull this out of my head. I'm going to flip to the book in a second just so I can pull up this name. Give me 1 second, and I'm not going to be able to find it in time, probably. Okay.
I'm supposed to fill time when you look. Let me give a little escalator trick.
Oh, man. What I'm lacking right now is this person's name. I'm honestly terrible with recalling names on the spot. So I'm not going to do it. It's getting worse all the time. And will LA become a place that only the rich can afford to live here? I don't think so. Perhaps only the rich can afford to buy here, but it's just too big. You may need to live in Azusa instead of West Hollywood, but you can be in Greater Los Angeles. And if you're just not too afraid about getting in your car and being willing to drive 45 minutes to see people. I guess there's some 45 people that'd be willing to drive. But anyway, I'm not that part I'm not worried about because I think the wealthy people are also leaving Los Angeles sometimes. There's a combination of the California tax code relying a little bit too heavily on the annual returns of wealthy people's stock investments, plus, whether it is Caitlyn Jenner was just complaining recently about how their buddy in a private airport hangar was moving to Arizona because they couldn't stand the sight of homeless people on the sidewalk and they found it distasteful. It's like, well, I find it distasteful because of those poor people having to live on a stupid sidewalk. It's not getting better. It's just going to get worse. And also we have the Olympics coming up. And you know what Olympics are great for? They're for shoveling problems, into a corner and not addressing them. There's fantasies throughout LA history of getting rid of problems, making problems disappear. And it doesn't help that we have virtually no safety net, no social structure to support people. So it's very easy to have people disappear or be disappeared. So hate to be a doom and gloomer, but that aspect of living in Los Angeles is not in good fortune. That said, there is a very large pilot program already happened in Long Beach, and it looks to be a go if the money and the politics stay going in the right direction for a UBI program in Los Angeles, which I believe would be the largest urban program of its kind in the city. Also, there's now, there's hope on the horizon. We all have to have hope. But you caught me in a question that I get quite angry about. So,
yeah, and Olympics will really be a nice excuse to clean things up. 84 was a trip. As I remember, I was extremely young. Let's not discuss that. I hate to date myself. Okay, let's do a book question. We are in a bookstore, virtually inside a bookstore.
I forgot. Hold on.
Nosley has asked, you've written
Hi, Nosley.
nonfiction books. And what did you learn? Now, this book is marked by being very, you've stitched together things really fluidly and nicely. This is a new technique, I feel like, for you. What was this the book you sent out to write? Was this something new you learned? What did you learn here? What did you learn here, if anything?
I was going to say, did you just paraphrase Nosley's question? I feel like you really went for it. I'm really excited about this. This is good. What did I learn here? Shoot.
What the fuck are you doing in this book, sir?
I'll tell you what, I didn't quite know how to write this book. I knew what I wanted to do with it, and I honestly went looking for books to rip off, to like steal a structure from, or to just get some idea that I could. The closest I got to it, wonderful book called Maximum City, or perhaps Orhan Pamuk did a book about Istanbul. Now, his much more memoir-based, he being from Istanbul, his family, and there's just photographs. It's beautiful, gorgeous writing, but it's a lot about his personal history. And the same, I'm going to blank right now, but the author of Maximum City also had a connection to Mumbai that he was exploring sort of that rootedness that his family had and what it meant like to come back and move there with his family as an adult. I didn't have that. I didn't have those personal ties. I do have an ancestor who lived here for a little while that I'm named after, but that's about it. So what I wanted to do was interweave the interviews that I did, the research that I performed, the voices of other writers who are just really well known or had great ideas or ways of describing Los Angeles, whether that's Octavia Butler, whether that's Mike Davis, and I got to interview Davis quite a bit for this book, which was really exciting as someone who read and really enjoyed and struggled with City of Quartz, years ago, and then went back to it in Ecology of Fear. In any case, what I wanted to try and do, like I was saying, both deep and narrow and wide and wide and narrow, deep and shallow, is try to get my arms around Los Angeles in a way that wasn't possessive, if that makes any sense. And so I really struggled with it. This was a really hard book to write. So if you're saying it came together, woven together smoothly, I really appreciate that, because that's certainly what I was striving for.
I particularly really like that you leaned so much and you did read so widely about the history of Los Angeles and read people writing on it. Like I thought that was really spectacular because it has been such a topic of conversation, and it allows you to weave in and present lots of different ideas that have come before, which is really wonderful without being too heavy-handed stuff. If we were going to read, if all of us were going to read one or two books about, or that set in about, that are related to Los Angeles, what would you tell us to read?
Sure. Okay. Corey, this is the kind of question I would have loved for you to have emailed me about before.
Oh, instead of putting you on the spot?
Instead of putting me on the spot.
Why don't I just tap dance for a little while you think about a book?
I'm saying that while I'm okay, here we go. Mean by Miriam Gerba. Young writer, Long Beach, terrific, searing, really well-written memoir that's called Mean by Miriam Gerba. Let's think about, let's go older than that. Well, listen, Carrie McWilliams' Island on the Land, that is the first history of Los Angeles that really got its hooks in me. There's just a really persuasive voice and a wide-ranging sense of investigation that I love. So Island on the Land by Carrie McWilliams. A third book, sorry, I just got caught up thinking about McWilliams. Well, let's just do Butler. Let's do Parable of the Sower. I mean, here is a book that practically predicts, facet after facet of contemporary Los Angeles. And it came out, 30 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, somewhere in there. Forgive me for getting that wrong. But her archives are stored here at the Huntington Library. And I got, very luckily, permission to go hang out there for a couple weeks, and there's a wonderful set of librarians there who were willing to let me sort of roam through her diaries. She had tons of journals and commonplace books, and she just had this sense of sort of willing herself into creation as an artist. That you see it in the journals and the diaries, and to watch a writer who's that good. Learn how to be themselves. It was really breathtaking. That's sincere. I'm not exaggerating. I really did find
I know. Also, I think reading her journals in the Huntington combines all my nature dreams into one afternoon. So I think I was like, oh, I could go do this.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a question from someone here, and I will not. Well, okay. Hi, Rosecrans. I'm Joseph May, a candidate for LA City Mayor in 2022. All right.
Hi, Joseph. Okay.
There you go. But he has a very good question, actually, despite the working it here. I find that LA feels like a very different place if you explore it in a car, by foot, and transit. As someone who used to walk to work in Hollywood and was constantly pulled over because people thought I was a prostitute because I was walking, which actually would make more money, it turned out, than working at the coffee shop I worked at. So that's for another time. In your research for the book, did you spend significant time outside of your car?
Well, first of all, I don't know this person, but good luck running for city council. If this person has great intentions and wants to fix Los Angeles, I am so happy to hear that, because the city council could use more people like this. I honestly don't know who this person is, just for everybody. This is not a plug. I'm saying that because sometimes it can be quite dispiriting to read about the politics of Los Angeles. In any case, did I spend much time in a car? Tons. First of all, I think Los Angeles is a very underrated walking city. As someone who lived both in New York and Paris, I think there are wonderful parts of Los Angeles to go walking through and experiencing it on the street. You know, there's a lot of people who drive around LA and don't realize we have a subway, who don't ride the bus, who don't understand the way that Los Angeles is experienced for a ton of people. And that's a bummer, because it's actually, you get to see a lot from a different perspective, and you get to absorb it differently, and it feels differently, and it smells differently, and in good ways. I'm not saying that in a bad way. Of course, it's different during COVID, but yeah, I mean, a couple ways that I explored it by foot outside of my car. One would be, for example, for the chapter that is largely set in Skid Row, I would just go down walking around in Skid Row and just sort of try to talk to people and learn more about it. But from that to, for example, I don't know that everyone knows this, but Los Angeles is right next to the Angeles National Forest, which is this astonishing large park that you can go backcountry skiing. It has these beautiful lakes. And I took a survival class. There's a chapter in the book that deals with natural disasters. And at one point I consulted or interviewed a guy named Thomas Coyne, who does training classes out here for military, special operations, and police forces, but he also does civilian classes. And so after our interview, he invited me. First of all, I went to a class of his over in Irvine. No, down in, well, it was somewhere. And it was an urban survival class. So he showed us how, if everything, goes to pot, how to charge your cell phone off of a car battery that you find abandoned on the highway, or how to drink the indoor plumbing water from a skyscraper. This is true. You can actually buy a key on Amazon. You can walk up to a skyscraper, just drain it. Text me later. I'll explain how. But Coyne does this survival class, which was 4 days out in the wilderness, where for 2 of them, you're not going to eat anything that you don't forage or hunt. You're not going to drink any water that you don't find and then boil on a fire that you built out of nothing. And the idea was to sort of improvise, how do you respond to really sort of wilderness experiences under duress? And he was making the point that when everything goes bad, should an earthquake erupt on Hollywood Boulevard, should massive fires come cascading down your canyons, life in Los Angeles can suddenly be a lot more about wilderness rules than how to get a reservation at the restaurant that's so busy. And that is the wilderness rules, the idea of just trying to survive with what's in front of what you got, unfortunately, is something that thousands upon thousands of 10,000s upon 10,000s of people in Los Angeles who are homeless deal with every day. So that gets sort of, I get woven into the chapter also about homelessness. But to answer your question, it was a lot of time spent outside of the car. But also a bunch of time spent inside the car. I enjoy driving, so no big deal.
I love to drive. I love to drive. Come on, it's the best.
I am lucky enough not to have to do an hour-and-a-half commute every day. That's how I get to say that.
California's a place I grew up with parents who lived separately, and they lived 200 miles apart. We did it twice a week. You think of, there's nothing, bless cars. I will point out that Joseph May has a TikTok account also. You can follow him there. Other places too.
Wow.
This is not
okay.
endorsement.
This is weird.
Hijacking your book event for some guy. I don't know. I'll go. I segue. There was a nice point in your thing about disaster. Z. Thornton says, "I've always been taken by the apocalyptic teleology of various LA lit and film, from Nathaniel West to Sam Shepard to Bryce Nellis, Steve Erickson to X, and A Quieter by Joan Didion."
Yeah.
Let's also add in Strange Days. I mean, listen, there's a lot of this. There's a grandiosity to disaster in LA culture that I don't think exists in any other American city. I agree with that. Why the aesthetic glee in watching the city burn again and again?
I mean, great question. What was this person's name again? Was it
Z. Thornton?
Thank you, Z. Thornton.
Yes.
Great question and great stuff inside of the question. So I need to now kill time while I think. Okay, first of all, this is not something that's gone unremarked upon. The aesthetics of burning and fire here have very obvious sources, whether it's a history of wildfires in the city or it's walking around and smelling smoke from, I don't know, a carne asada operation on Whittier, or it's, many of those things that they cited in the question in terms of the aesthetic works. Or, for example, I don't know if you knew this, Corey, there is a habit here when there's a big fire that people will launch drones in order to go get their own footage of the fire, whether for their personal enjoyment or social media, which has the unfortunate side effect of grounding aircraft. So if there's a helicopter that's trying to dump water on the fire, that helicopter has to turn around and go land until the drone has landed because there's too much danger for the helicopter pilot. Why is there this glee? Why is there the pleasure around fire? Gosh, if I knew that, I would have written a different book. We are certainly entering, an era of greater, worse, more dangerous and deadly fire than Los Angeles has seen. This is not a surprise. You talk to any climate scientist. I talked to a couple for this book. It's pretty definite. So why the pleasure? I think sometimes fire obviously can represent the destruction of something that you hated. It can be taking down, it can feel like the last solution, but also perhaps the only solution. There's a number of cases of people who are arsonists that are actually firefighters. I mean, there's all kinds of contradictions in fire. I don't have a good answer for this. I just have a lot of stories in the book that deal with fire, people that I talk to.
It's a Taiwan tradition. I mean, like when I was a kid, we used to sit outside in chairs and watch the hills burn down. That was before drones.
You never told me about that, Corey. I didn't know about that side of your childhood.
There's a lot I didn't tell you about my childhood, and I will never tell anyone. It's for me and my fucking therapist.
My next nonfiction book, The Childhood of Choire Sicha.
Oh yeah, I mean, really good. A couple of things here. There's a couple of good things in the chat I want to bring up. There's one there's a question that I'm going to put in here from Jeffrey Lewis that is not actually answerable, and you shouldn't try. But okay. But he's bringing up decentralized tech-first approaches to loneliness. How do you see the role of the internet being woven into the experience of being in Hollywood land, especially with TikTok and the democratization of being the star of your own television series? Which I would say there's actually so much more to that than that, but that's an obsession of mine, and I'll let you discuss it, not me.
I think it's a great question. I think it is certainly a really up to the moment issue. I mean, I live in Hollywood, sort of part of Beechwood Canyon, which is this weird old sort of funky part of Hollywood. And Rachel and I will go for walks in the neighborhood, especially during lockdown, get some fresh air. And we're not too far away from the Hollywood Reservoir. And by the Hollywood Reservoir, there's like this very recently built big stacked condos that appears to house a young group of people who are just permanently on the internet. I think they're gamers. They might be called the FaZe Clan. They just, people that sort of exist behind drawn blinds. And yet you'll walk past the building and you'll see 3 guys out on the patio, one of them filming, the 2 others doing little stunts, but for TikTok presumably. But then they'll cut and then they'll have to do it again. And you see them doing this over and over. We'll finish the walk, come back, and they're still trying to get this one little scene. Man, it's a bummer. Listen, I don't advocate for anyone living on the internet full time. I don't think it's a good path we're going down. Corey may disagree. But as to the loneliness of it all, I mean, look at the Bo Burnham special. There's a detachment. This is nothing new. I'm not going to surprise anybody with any of this. But there is a detachment that can sometimes make it difficult to reattach when it comes to sort of person-to-person interactions. And it's a little bit disturbing to me. I don't have much I'd have to think about this to actually say something intelligent.
I think something amazing is happening out there, and I think you will keep an eye on it, hopefully, and others will as well. But it's what is happening with people documenting their lives and monetizing that documentation is actually amazing.
Yeah, I agree.
And also is sort of striking and distressing in many ways, and is also going to have a lot of consequences for people who are teenagers right now. Here's something good to end on, is we will wrap this party up in a few moments from Liv Lansdale, which is a terrific name.
Liv Lansdale, that is a terrific name.
God bless.
L-I-V, Liv?
Yeah.
Okay, Liv Lansdale.
What a classic. By the way, I lived at Yucca and Cherokee for years. Well,
oh, no kidding.
Okay.
So
down the hill from you.
Yeah, near where William Faulkner used to live.
Back when there were car fires on the street. Visiting LA for the first time in 4 days. What spots in LA feel like they're in your words, an ever-present moment? And also spots one should check out as a book lover. So that's actually a great question. It's like the question is not what's happening. The question is like, where does the time stop?
Where does the time stop? What a wonderful question. And I will say, to your point about cars on fire, I mean, I did walk downstairs one day and there was a man, warming his hands by a fire that he built out of my garbage next to my door. So, it's variations on a theme.
I do like that LA actually can't shake that. Like it's kind of wonderful.
To answer Liv's question, so a couple spots that feel very present and have a bookish vibe to them. Okay, let's try this. First of all, I would say if you enjoy bookstores, there's great old bookstores and great recent bookstores. And to me, that's a place I like to go as a bookish kind of person, to just sort of be present in the moment and just stare at some books. And now that we can go back to bookstores and actually talk to booksellers, and booksellers can do that beautiful thing where they recommend your next great book, I just love that. So a couple that I would recommend would be The Last Bookstore downtown. Is very odd aesthetic experience to wander around inside. It's like built inside of an old bank vault. Isawan Books over in Leimert Park is a gorgeous bookstore, mostly focused on books about African-American life, but a generally sort of broad view and terrific staff that can sort of make recommendations. My local is Skylight Books, another terrific one that can make great ideas. Other places, though, that feel very present. Listen, this is generic, but I always feel like the beach is a place that is a way to sort of feel that that sense of time rushing by but not moving at all. And whether that's, I like the beaches that are a little bit more democratic and wild, so that'd be Venice or Dockweiler, but obviously there's nice beaches in Malibu. They're just a little bit different. Oh, but you can get, this is fun, and probably you won't do this, Liv, but there is a great app for phones called My Malibu Beaches that teaches you how to, because the beach belongs to everybody legally, but there are certain executives of certain film studios that live on the beach that have erected various barriers that are illegal but are still there to try and convince you otherwise. And My Malibu Beaches explains to you how to get onto the beach in ways that are actually legal. But finally, another place that just feels really, really present. I don't have a great, I'd have to think about this better. I'm sorry, Liv. But probably somewhere in the valley. I mean, Corey, you're a valley person. I mean, I'll just come back to the Huntington because they did me so many favors, but the Huntington Gardens are just magnificent to wander around.
It's good.
It's just astonishing. They've got a great little cafe for lunch, and
also,
I don't know if
In-N-Out down by in Pasadena is good too. So
there you go.
In-N-Out on your way to the Huntington.
Liv, I hope that helps. I hope you have a wonderful trip.
You can't go wrong. Climb a staircase in Los Angeles. You can't go wrong.
There are so many, whether it's over in Santa Monica or in Silver Lake or in Beechwood or downtown. There's so many. Please get your exercise.
Extinguish your cigarettes before hiking. And we never used to when I was a young person.
Yeah.
Rosecrans, is there anything else you want to tell us before we depart this veil of chat?
I would tell everyone thank you for being here. That's it.
Oh.
This is a strange time to sell books. It's a strange time to have books out. I look forward to all the authors who are able to go out on book tours in the coming months and meet people. In the meantime, it is I'll take anything I can get. So thank you. Yeah, that's it.
When they are vaccinated, hug your local bookseller. When they're not, just hug them anyway. I don't fucking know.
Rosecrans, Corey, thank you so much. You guys actually convinced me. I might move to LA now, so thank you for that.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, you got one. You got one. To our audience member, thank you for joining us. If you still haven't made a purchase and would like to make a purchase of Rosecrans' new book, Everything Now, you could do so clicking at the green link at the bottom of your screen. It does come with a signed book plate by Rosecrans, so just click on that link. Once again, thank you to the New Republic for collaborating with us at this event. And with that note, thank you guys so much. Have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Corey.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Strand.
Be careful out there.